Industry Focus listeners, we've got a special treat for you this week. With Flippalooza, the Motley Fool's annual gathering of employees from across TMF's global offices, we won't be able to record a podcast for you this week. As a result, we're going to the TMF Vault to bring you a never-before-heard episode of Industry Focus, featuring former Industry Focus energy and financials host Michael Douglas. Times were simpler back when this podcast was recorded. The S&P was over 2,800, oil was almost $80 a barrel. Elon Musk had never appeared on a podcast with Joe Rogan. Things were different, okay? One thing that hasn't changed, though, is space. So without further ado, we present to you the last ride of Michael Douglas.
Welcome to Industry Focus, the podcast that dives into a different sector of the stock market every day. It's Thursday, and that means it's energy and industrials, and we're talking about space, the final frontier. I'm your host, Michael Douglas. I'm joined by Lou Whiteman. Two notes before we get too far into the weeds. The first one, this show was pre-recorded on August 29th, so some of the things that we're talking about may be a little bit dated as of the time that you're hearing it. Usually we don't anticipate. Usually when we do a pre-record, that's because we don't anticipate major changes happening. But the thing with major changes is sometimes they're unexpected. So that's caveat number one. Point number two, I am, my TMF name is TMF Enterprise, which tells you which way I fall on the great Star Trek versus Star Wars debate. Lou, I don't know where you fall on this, but I think this is something our listeners deserve to know. How do you feel about, one of the greatest matches in sci-fi?
Or Star Wars, right?
Oh, okay.
I mean, I think I need to be down the middle here. I enjoy both. I don't know if I ever got obsessed with either, but I have watched way too much of both and enjoyed it.
So I'll go ahead and admit something that I don't usually admit, but hey, why not? So in addition to TMF Enterprise, I also have a model of the USS Enterprise on my desk. And when I was but I'm also actually very much a Star Wars fan. When I was in middle school, I wrote over 200 pages of Star Wars fanfic, which fortunately was never sent to a publisher. And also,
do you still have it?
No, unfortunately, and it's really a shame for the literary world. I promise. My computer's hard drive died because it was the early aughts, and that's we didn't have cloud storage and things like that, or at least I didn't, and so I unfortunately lost my masterpiece.
Oh man, because there's so many opportunities now for new shows and new networks and stuff. It's the world's loss.
Yeah, George Lucas, call me. Anyway, so we're talking about space today, and it's interesting because I think that when people are thinking about space, they usually are doing it. You immediately think about Neil Armstrong on the moon. You're thinking about exploration, scientific missions. More recently, due to the advent of companies like SpaceX and Virgin Galactic, we've been talking a lot more about travel, colonization, and things like that. And of course, with Trump's recent moves to launch a space force, I think people are increasingly aware of space's military applications too. But the fact is, I think people tend to generally view space as this thing that we're sort of going to do more with at some point. I think that's fair. That's true. That's very likely. But we've also been doing quite a bit with space as it is, and I'm not just talking about the Apollo launches and the space shuttles and, the various satellites that we've, the various probes we put out there, but also satellites and things like GPS for the military, which has been, was a major military project and has now been, to some extent, opened up to civilian use.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. I'll use another entertainment reference and really show my age. I think with this Space Force talk recently, a lot of the mental images have been something out of the James Bond movie Moonraker, where you have astronauts shooting lasers at each other across a huge space battlefield. But in reality, there is a lot of military defense space spending right now. Most of it, Space Force would be a separate place to house it all. Currently, it's mostly out of the Air Force. They have a space and missions center that out of Los Angeles that does about 85% of what the Pentagon spends in space right now. There's 6,000 people working there. They have a portfolio of assets north of $6 billion. That's just the non-classified stuff. And in fiscal 19, before all this Space Force talk, the DoD budget includes about $9.3 billion for space programs. That's about half of that is satellites. You have over $2 billion in launch vehicles and another $2 billion in maintenance. Figure that spending is very conservative. It's probably significantly higher because a lot of this is classified programs, and it's growing. It was at about $7.8 billion in fiscal 18, so it was growing even before there was any talk of Space Force.
Yeah, and as you noted, and I'll just kind of double underline that point, the thing with classified is we don't know much about it. And when you think about really cutting edge research that's going to be tending to happen in the classified space, because we don't necessarily want to let everyone around the world know all the advantages perhaps that the U.S. is working to garner. And so there is probably a fair amount going on there.
Sure. And as far as the spending item, too, given that so much of this is bleeding edge, any research being done is likely very difficult research. You can't just take things off the shelf. And so, yeah, you can almost be certain that there are a lot of dollars, maybe an amount equal to what we know about going, if you go into research and development and the different labs, the different research institutions, and also the government contractors who do a lot of this R&D. There's a lot we don't know about in this sector in particular. Yeah,
and the sort of broader picture of all this is that this spending has been rising, and it's going to keep rising because as we were talking about before here, I mean, the status quo of the U.S. being unchallenged in space is over. Russia is doing quite a bit. China is doing quite a bit. And we're actually behind in some areas, particularly hypersonics, which is about traveling at sort of 5 times the speed of sound.
Sure. I think it's fair to say the United States rested on its laurels. We won the space race. We had the space shuttle. Russia was going through the breakup of the Soviet Union. We were the undisputed leader for a long time. And as a result, we slowed down our pace of innovation. As you say, that is no longer the case. Hypersonics is a perfect example. These are missiles that are capable, due to their speed, due to their maneuverability. They travel in low space, and they are basically unstoppable with any technology we have. Russia claims they have a system in place. China is very close. We are way behind. The Air Force has given out about $1.4 billion in contracts this year, all to Lockheed Martin, to try and play catch up, and they are determined to make it a quick catch up. But yes, there and in other places where we were the only power for a long time, now the systems we have are vulnerable, and arguably in a lot of areas, research being done elsewhere, if not matches what we're doing, it exceeds it in terms of what they've been able to develop.
Yep. And I mean, there's quite a bit going on here, and I mean, I think as we also sort of consider the military applications, there are also some significant non-military applications as well, right? And so, there's quite a bit with, Lockheed has a NASA contract to develop a Concorde replacement. Northrop Grumman is working on the James Webb Space Telescope, which is going to, I think you'd said it was going to cost something like $10 billion or so before it launches.
All in, yes. Yeah.
And of course, there's manned missions too.
Right. And there's a part of this is too, that, as you say, is that all of this stuff, I don't know if it's necessarily the first thing people think about with the defense contractors, but the defense contractors are front and center in all of these things. Like you say, Lockheed, Northrop Grumman, Boeing Space is a huge division. Boeing and SpaceX, the Elon Musk startup, they are both right now competing they've both developed capsules that NASA is going to use to carry astronauts to the International Space Station, hopefully very soon. There's been a lot of delays there. But yes, NASA is doing a lot of work, a lot of due to NASA's size and NASA's capabilities right now, a lot of the R&D that they do, they outsource to, again, research institutions, but a lot of it is to the private sector. NASA's overall budget, it was about $20 billion, $19.5 billion. They're spending $10 billion right now on exploration, which is the cutting edge stuff, returning humans to the moon, and eventually all this talk of Mars.
Yeah, and one of the things that's important to note here is I think there's always this question about, okay, exploration, what's that really worth, right? So what is all this kind of, science stuff worth? And I think one of the things that people often forget is that a lot of innovations come because of that, because when you're having to figure out how to keep somebody alive in zero G, or to scrub out carbon dioxide and things like that, that creates inventions that can be really very useful and have a lot of military and civilian applications. So there's a lot to think about there in terms of benefits.
Right. And a lot of that we don't realize until after the fact, which is why it's so important to do the research. I mean, the crazy thing about NASA is hoping to have humans on the moon by the middle part of next decade. A lot of the tech that they're counting on towards that goal, which is not very far off, is still in development. The Space Launch System, a massive new rocket that is going to be needed to set up think about it, the midpoint station. The idea is that there would be a separate station orbiting the moon. We can build that, but to get it into orbit, we need a rocket that is still in the development phase. Here we are halfway through 2018, and they hope to be doing it by 2024. The amount of research needed, and as you say, the benefits that will come from that from all sorts of ways we can't anticipate. History has shown that happens, and it will come. It's really hard to look at right now as we're looking forward, but I don't doubt that there is payback in these investments in ways that we can't even imagine right now.
Okay, so let's turn back to this whole space thing, which is a pretty big opportunity. And let's talk about sort of what the current big players look like.
Sure. Well, it's somewhat hard to look on the fence because it's coming from so many different areas, but I think we can pretty safely say that the companies we're going to talk about with NASA are also the biggest players for defense. Fiscal 2017, the top NASA contractor was actually a university, which kind of shows how much R&D goes into this. But following them was Boeing with over $2 billion in procurements, Lockheed with $1.4 billion, and then again, SpaceX, the startups that's doing a lot of the launching work. Orbital Science, which was acquired by Northrop, they were number 5. Northrop was also in the top 10. Raytheon is there. A company called Harris, which is sort of under the radar, but does a lot of work in space. These are all top 10 contractors to NASA. They're all doing a lot of work for the Defense Department. Yeah,
and so it's very clear that, or it seems very clear to me that what the strategy has been on the government side is to spread things around as much as possible. You don't want to have a single point of failure. You don't want to have one company that has everything locked up. Instead, what you want is a bunch of different folks kind of working toward this goal, so that basically the public side isn't suddenly just completely dependent on one private player, so that they can kind of make sure that there's an open market and a lot of innovation going on.
That's an important point, and it's actually something that's often discussed in government circles, because the downside with that is that you're developing sometimes redundant systems, or you're funding research that one of the two candidates may not make it. That's an expensive process, but given that a lot of this stuff has never been done before, there is a need inside, or a desire inside the government, to have multiple parties working on it, multiple failures or multiple experiments. That is a great opportunity for these companies, because these things aren't cheap. And for all of the goals we have, part of the reason that they are so expensive is there's so much work that goes into it from multiple parties. Yeah. From a business case, it's a great business to be in.
Right, because ultimately spending is going to keep increasing, and
yes,
and there will be opportunities for as various let's say various international powers scale up and identify certain companies that are doing well, or certain gaps in their systems and things that they need. That will give these defense contractors a lot of opportunity to develop a lot of really good hardware and a lot of great science in a lot of different places for a lot of different clients.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. And there's continued opportunities to expand too. I mean, Northrop, I mentioned, bought Orbital Sciences for almost $10 billion dead end. That's a major deal. That's going to reshape Northrop, and really it shows what that executive team thinks of the future of space, because they have decided that space is going to be a priority. There aren't too many other orbital sciences out there for these big guys. There are some companies that might fit nicely into a portfolio, but I think Northrop signaled their intention, and I don't think they're alone in the thinking of how important space is. They didn't go out and buy a land systems maker. They didn't go out and say, let's get big into tanks. They are investing in space because they see it as an opportunity for growth. And I don't think many executives at these other contractors would question that line of thought anyway.
Yeah,
I think that should be a tell for investors as far as where these companies see spending increasing.
Yeah, no, I think that's very fair, and to some extent, of course, in markets, folks are going to follow the money, and that's why I think we're seeing so many. Obviously Northrop go after Orbital, but also these startups, right? Whether it's SpaceX, whether it's Virgin Galactic, whether it's Bezos's Blue Origin. All trying to kind of find ways to play in this space and get a chunk of this ever-increasing pie.
Sure. And, Elon Musk has been really smart about this, because as much as the focus on Blue Origin and SpaceX is going to Mars and space tourism and stuff, these systems are expensive to develop, and the government is a reliable customer. And SpaceX has done very well from, earning the trust of the government and getting these contracts. That pays for a lot of the R&D. That's sort of the interesting thing, if you look at it for investors here, is that while there are wonderful opportunities, there's also a lot of companies, an increasing number of companies, going after this pie. Northrop's buy for Orbital, part of that is they'd like to move into this area, the heavy launch area, where right now a joint venture between Boeing and Lockheed is competing with SpaceX. That competition is going so well that the joint venture, United Launch Service, has done layoffs, they've done cutbacks, and they're complaining about they aren't getting the margins they need to sustain a business. Well, Northrop with Orbital is going to make that a lot more complicated. So while there is a lot of spending and it's going to increase, there just a little word of caution, especially for these companies that are too reliant on it, that it isn't just part of the business. There's also a lot of competition. There's a lot of people following that money.
Yeah, absolutely. And one of the kind of the, if you're thinking about the space area, I think one of the key things to think about here is that there aren't really a ton of publicly traded pure plays. Really, the opportunity is to kind of look at a large diversified company and sort of see space as a part of that and sort of like as an opportunity within that company. Of course, there are two big caveats that come with that, right? The first one is that large company, whatever it might be, has a bunch of other divisions. And, before considering, like so-and-so is playing in space, I'm really excited about them, you want to make sure that you're also excited about the rest of what they're doing too. Because if you're not, that may mean that, they fail to compete well, et cetera, et cetera. And in a case like that, I mean, it's hard to pick one company over, say, an ETF. The second caveat that I'll throw out there is that it's early days. I mean, yes, we've been in space for a long time. Obviously, these companies have been scaling up what they're doing in space for a while, but we are in the early days of a lot of really kind of big ideas and a lot of big expansions. And so trying to pick a winner right now, pretty darn difficult. And so particularly given that so much of stuff is classified. And so kind of the way to think about that is that does make it very difficult to pick winners versus losers. And that's just something to kind of keep in mind as you're thinking about investing in this space.
Sure. And, the funny thing is it's almost the nature of space is it's always early days, because the second we get to the moon, then you can look to Mars, or et cetera, which is both. I mean, there's a lot of risks. There's a lot of risks both for the astronauts and for the companies making the capsules. But there is so much opportunity there as long as it is a focus, and be it because of the military's interest and need and NASA's interest and their funding levels, there is the opportunity there.
So I have to ask, Which happens first? Permanent colony on the moon, permanent colony on Mars?
Oh, the moon. Just the scale of the challenge is so much. It's so much easier to get to the moon, and if nothing else, they should. The moon is a good place to learn and fail and learn again, if to hopefully not fail. But our ability to get back and forth to the moon, even right now, if we had to, it makes it a great training ground. And frankly, unless we figure out a new propulsion system, if you go back to high school physics, it's tough to get through the Earth's gravity. And if we could launch something for a long-range mission from the moon instead of launching it from the Earth, the amount of fuel you'd need would be greatly reduced, and it would make the whole process so much simpler. I think I have no doubt in my mind we'll be on the moon before we'll be on Mars.
All right. Well, you heard it here first. Well, maybe not here first, but you heard it here. Well, folks, that's it for this week's Energy Industrials Show. Questions or comments, you can always reach the team at industryfocus@fool.com. As always, people on the program may have interests in the stocks they talk about, and the Motley Fool may have formal recommendations for or against, so don't buy or sell stocks based solely on what you hear. This show is produced by Austin Morgan. For Lou Whiteman, I'm Michael Douglas. Thanks for listening, and Fool on. As of the time that you're hearing this show, Michael Douglas works for Motley Fool Wealth Management, LLC, an affiliate of the Motley Fool, LLC, and an investment advisor registered with the U.S. Securities and Exchange Commission. The views expressed herein are those of Mr. Douglas and do not necessarily reflect the views of Motley Fool Wealth Management or any of its affiliates. These comments may not be relied upon as recommendations, financial or investment advice, or an indication of trading intent.